members. The next speaker on my list is Dmitry Berezhkov, Indigenous Russia. Dmitry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For more than 500 days, a horrible war has been going on in Ukraine, which has been unleashed by the Russian Federation. This war has claimed thousands of lives of Ukrainian civilians. Every day, people die in their homes under bombs and missiles that President Putin is sending to destroy peaceful Ukrainian cities. This war has claimed thousands of lives of indigenous peoples from both sides, as the indigenous peoples of Crimea are being killed by Russian bullets, while indigenous peoples of Russia, who continue to be the most vulnerable and most deprived population in our country, were forcibly drafted into the Russian armed forces and are dying in Ukraine as soldiers of the colonial army. The Russian aggression against Ukraine is the most horrible war of our time. For instance, the landmining of Ukrainian territories, including indigenous peoples' ancestral lands, is even more intense than during the Second World War. Over the last year, the expert mechanism has been developing a report on the militarization of indigenous lands. I recall that this publication of this report was postponed for 1 year, specifically in order to give time to include information about the war in Ukraine in the report. And what do we see as a result? The report contains no information at all about the war and how it impacts indigenous people's lives in both countries. As far as Russia is concerned, a couple of bullet points say that indigenous peoples of Russia were exempt from military service in the context of conflict in Ukraine. This is a lie and factually inaccurate. My indigenous friends from Yakutia were grabbed forcibly by the Russian army for the war in Ukraine precisely because they are indigenous hunters, because they have hunting experience while they have no formal employment, and they can speak indigenous languages which Ukrainian soldiers could not understand. The other point from the report is that cross-border Sami cooperation has been seriously affected, and Sami employees in Russia cannot receive salaries. Are you serious? We gathered information about indigenous soldiers from Russia who have died in this war. 6 Russian Sami young men were already killed during the war, and this is a huge number for such a small nation of 1,500. The expert mechanism didn't mention this information in its report, but mentioned lost salaries. Everybody who follows indigenous rights in Russia clearly sees that Russian officials use exactly the same language in their propagandistic speeches, which used by the expert mechanism in its so-called expert report on militarization. This is a disgrace, and I have a question with regard to the above. When and why did the EMRIP from the human rights body transform into Russian propaganda department? We understand that this is a draft, and we insist it has to be changed to include real information from this war.
Thank you for your statement, Dmitry.